Okay, there we go. That's weird. Might be recording twice using both Zoom and one using Fathom, but that should be a-okay. So jerk prompting, right, Justin? That's essentially what our example in today's repo is. If you haven't bookmarked this repo yet, bookmark the repo. This is where you can be going every day to go over today's lesson with us. And if Omer did not go through this format with you, it's really straightforward. We have multiple modules. The idea being that we run through a full stack of tech stack framework, whatever you'd like to call it, twice. Once with standard, let's say, programming languages and whatnot, and the second time with like frameworks. So we do that to try and encourage you to think about the nature of a full stack application, how different parts of it connect to another through those various iterations. So in our first module, we are covering fundamentals, and each module has different weeks. We are in week 1, we are on day 2. So what we're covering is prompt engineering. And the example here, we could either try to follow the example, like just copy pasting the prompts, or we can maybe try something a little more fun and have people suggest stuff. So what we're doing though is we're going to be reviewing some concepts, some techniques and strategies to improve your prompt writing, how to get better results faster from AIs and GPTs. So the importance of thoughtful questioning, quotes like "nothing shapes our journey through life so much as the questions we ask." It pertains not only to culture, society, and connection, networking, but also to, and maybe specifically very important to, prompt engineering and AI. So here we have an example of what ChatGPT 3.5 gave us, and that gives you an idea of how old this lesson is. It's giving us a bit of attitude. Preheat the oven. I can't believe I have to say this. Sear those steaks because someone has to compensate for your lack of taste. Toss them into the oven like you're throwing away your dignity. And I think I found Jordan's comment on this to be very amusing last cohort. Thought it was a little too cruel. But if we go into, so let's go into ChatGPT right now and ask it, how do you cook a steak? It's essentially going to be giving us this like really vanilla answer. And that may not be what you want. Maybe it is. But through various prompt engineering techniques, you can alter the output. Like, let's say you don't like getting this big of a response. You could tell it to be more concise. And it's going to break it down. Well, it looks like it's really the same thing. It's taking out some of the text, so it is a little more concise. Still a lot of steps. You could ask it to do things like put this into a table, and I'll try to do that. And what you'll probably be doing a lot is asking it for code, right? And when you're asking it for code, sometimes it's going to spit out a lot at you, depending on how in-depth your question is. So there are things you could do, like specify the syntax and the formatting of the response. So tell me how you would write this out as a JavaScript. Oh, y'all are starting with Python. Let's do Python as a Python class. And it's spitting out some code. If this were super complicated and like there were a lot of different chunks, maybe different files, different components to it, you might notice from time to time that things like the syntax would break. And so you can do things like remind it to escape its backtick. Does that make sense? Like just that last phrase, escape the backtick. Okay, a few nods. Cool.
When you say escape the backtick, do you mean putting it in there, or what are you?
Specifically in, let's pull up VS Code already, and let me show you what I mean. So I think I might have to switch sharing here. All right. Cool. I think you could see this. So when you're doing things like asking for a particular format like Markdown, this is Markdown syntax. You use triple backticks and you specify what language you want it to render as. So let's also save this as a Markdown file. Title 3 is fine. And as a Markdown file, you could do things in VS Code like preview it. And if we say things like, hello, this is a title, you'll be able to see that these are formatted differently. And I cannot spell. Inside here, this is where you would generally put things like code blocks. Now, ChatGPT, sometimes if you're asking it for like complicated code and it's got to spit out a bunch of like different chunks of code at you, while it's also trying to like write explanations in between, or it's trying to write explanations inside this markdown box, this comment or whatever, it's going to break, and you may have to do a bit of troubleshooting to figure out why did the syntax break. Specifically for ChatGPT, a lot of times you could just ask it to, one good place to check, to start checking, is to ask it to escape a character, because it might have added an extra backtick. It might have forgotten a backtick. A lot of those things can occasionally occur. And so one quick, easy thing to try is to ask it to escape it. And that's really just adding a / to it. We'll talk more about escaping in the coming weeks. It's used, I mean, it's used in a lot of like small places, but basically, let's talk about like the fundamentals of programming, right? Somebody give me an explanation of like how code works.
Um, it's a set of instructions. I will explain it, I guess, from a high level. But anyways, it's a set of in instructions that go to the from the processor and does whatever it needs to do in a sense.
Yeah, it really is. Like does anybody else want to add anything? To add like a few more layers to it, right? The instructions that you're passing in, that is the code that you write, right? And when you execute this code, what you're doing is you're calling some sort of compiler. In this case, if we were like creating a Python script, I accidentally lost the window. You would be using Python installed on your local machine to interpret the code. Interpretation is essentially running through the code and magically passing it through its own like file structure, etc. And it spits out results. That's essentially programming in a nutshell, right? Now I'm trying to remember why I was on this tangent. Okay, so escaping characters. When you're communicating between various interpreters and compilers, they may not always be speaking the same language. And so when it comes down to passing things like strings or characters, sometimes one interpreter may not like how it's formatted, even though another does. And these are instances where you could use escapes to essentially tell the interpreter, hey, don't read this as whatever you're trying to read it as, just print it. Like that's a very basic example. And again, we'll cover that more in the coming weeks. It's not super prevalent to today's stuff. All right, where's everybody at so far?
What do you mean? Where
Anyone,
everybody at?
anyone feeling lost or overwhelmed? Am I like just going in random
Um,
direction?
I guess one of the things that I'm wondering, like when I hear you say the prompt and the escape, is this, I mean, I guess what is the purpose and intent of us, I guess, asking this chat GPT? I mean, is this a form of code that we are doing in the prompt, or are we just asking it questions to see if we can break it? Like I don't see the intent yet, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. No, that's good feedback. And I probably threw out an example that was just, I don't know, not a great example to throw out. Because if you haven't played around with ChatGPT a lot, then you haven't experienced these things firsthand. You haven't had the experience of trying to troubleshoot your interactions with ChatGPT so as to get the results that you want, right? But that's essentially what prompt engineering is in a nutshell. It's knowing how to manipulate your prompts in a way that you get the data that you want. You all clear?
Yes. So it's knowing how to ask the right questions. Is that what you mean by prompting?
Yeah, that's
Okay. Yeah.
exactly it. Yes, yes. And so there are concepts to be aware of, like breadth versus depth. This is basically something that refers to various methods for teaching for machine learning. I think, and Justin, feel free to step in and elaborate if it ever sounds like you have something great to add that everyone else can.
Uh,
Hey,
yeah,
Julia,
I'll back off.
Yeah.
is it just me or is I can't hear you very well? You got real quiet. Is that just me?
I think it's my computer. It might be my mic. Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
that's better.
Trying to speak up, but yeah, I think I gotta get a better mic or something. So we'll try to power through for now like this. Let me know if I cut out again, and I'll try to have a better mic by next week. So what was the last thing that I said that was actually clear?
I don't know, you were talking about breadth versus depth, I guess, in terms of like a strategy to use for prompt engineering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I was just also, this is probably where I cut off, but I was just adding, if anybody ever has like something um, valuable to add, like something that they've learned and is relevant, I personally say, hey, go for it, share it with the class. If you don't feel like just interjecting and jumping right in, Zoom, for those of you who have not used Zoom a lot, has all sorts of cool little reaction features. So you could do things like raise your hand or share a reaction to maybe avoid breaking the flow of whatever's being talked about. So utilize those things, utilize whatever's in your Zoom interface. I think the more engagement we get during these lectures, the more prepared you all will be going into the challenges. Okay, so breadth versus depth. There are a few various classifications of prompts in this category. So there's zero shot, one shot, few shot. These basically refer to the number of examples, the data sets that you are providing to the AI. So if you were trying to get it to recognize like a very particular class, but you don't want to influence its learning or its interpretation, then you might want to pass in either a zero or a one shot. If you need specificity in your data, then you might want to go for a multi or few shot prompt. Basically, the less that you feed into your prompt, the more creative control the AI has in responding. But if you want to limit that control, then that's where more specific and intentional instructions really come into play. So here in this example, it looks like we asked prompt or ChatGPT how to cook a steak. It gave us this really long answer. So what did we do? We specified the output. You already saw me specify a few different things, like setting it all into a table and then as Python code, which, by the way, I think we didn't even look through, but it's pretty interesting. It creates a steak class and it initializes with these variables and has a series of various methods that can be called. Prepare, check doneness, rest. And an example of using this is to instantiate the steak class, passing in what kind of steak you want. So we want a ribeye steak. We want it to have a thickness of 1.5, and we want it to be medium rare, and we want to use a grilling method. And what this will do is call the cook method, which will then use a conditional to see whether it's going to use stovetop or grill. Does that make sense? So
I don't know how many people have experience with classes, but that might look foreign to them right now.
yeah, we'll be covering this like real soon, like within this week or next week, we'll be jumping straight into doing some algorithms in Python, and then we'll eventually be getting the classes by like the third week. So if it doesn't look too, I don't know, if it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, it's okay. We'll be covering it soon. One thing I did notice is it was a very simple prompt that I passed in, and so it didn't really give me a great answer. It gave me an example of how it could be used with one single method, and that might not show me how any of these other methods work, right? So I could ask it certain things like, how would I use these other methods? And so it's giving us more instructions on how to do that. But going back to the idea of zero prompt or zero shot, one shot, few shot prompts. So far, I've been passing in very, very basic prompts. Let's do something a little more complicated. So let's say we wanted to give us some information on something, like maybe statistics, and or maybe we wanted to make a prediction, or maybe we wanted to, I don't know, does anybody have any ideas for a prompt? Just throw one out there.
Who's going to the Super Bowl?
It's going to the and we could see that as of now, it's giving us these predictions. And it tells us that it searched for sites for these results. Let's see. Let's ask which of these sites are most, I don't know, credible. And it gives us its opinion, I guess, on who is the most credible. So these are, again, still just examples of like zero shot prompting. They're very simple prompts. If we want something more complicated, I'm like blank on this right now.
I have a very easy one that we use to train with, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Basically, I would tell it to classify the text of a sentence. I'll say like, classify this sentence is this positive, neutral, or negative?
And would a prompt like this be like one shot?
This is a one shot.
Because it's simple.
I'm sorry,
and
this is
to the
zero.
point?
This is zero shot.
And that's because it's simple and to the point, right?
Right, we're not going to give it any examples, right? So
So
and then give it a sentence that like, I think the salad is okay, or the steak is okay, or something, you know, that's neutral. And then ask it its opinion.
oh, let's just do one for now, right?
Yeah, that's the easy way to do it. Sure.
Just pass this in, or should I elaborate?
And it'll give you sentiment. So it's saying it's neutral, and that's like the simplest form of zero shot that we've found to train with. So.
And so an example of few shot would be if we were to give it examples of what neutral is. And so if we were to say, classify these sentences as either positive, neutral, or negative. Again, oh, before we give them the sentences, we can say something like, neutral sentence is one that
No strong opinion.
or that has no strong opinion.
And then if you want to get real technical, and I think this might be the next level up, but for the next level, you would say is neither positive nor negative, right?
Okay. So let's give it something maybe that might be a little tricky. So because we gave specific instruction here, we were sort of influencing its response. It might have said the same thing had we not provided that. It really boils down to what you're passing in. Is that kind of clear enough for everybody? Zero versus few versus multi?
So this last one that you sent, is this an example of a one shot, or is this still a zero shot?
It would be a one shot,
This would be one shot. Okay.
right? We're giving an example.
So a better kind of descriptor would be like, you'd say, this is awesome. And then the opposite of that would be negative. This is bad. The opposite of that would be positive. And that's kind of the way we rate these when we do them. So we don't tell it what awesome is, we tell it the opposite of awesome. It's easier for the machine to understand that than it is to get the context of awesome.
So that, would you say that produces better results?
Much better results, as far as where the language models are currently.
Interesting. That is really good to know. That is really good to know. Cool. So that's breadth versus depth. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that we could cover, so let's try to get through it a little faster. Right, setting limits. An example of that would be specifying what you don't want it to do. If it's giving you, for example, some code that requires a library that you don't want to install, just tell it that you don't want to use that library and that you want to find another way. Providing deeper context, we sort of did a little bit of that. It's not that deep, but we did specify a little further what is a neutral sentence. And like in Justin's example, by specifying the opposite, we're giving it more clarity. And you could get really, really specific and structured, right? Doing things like following a guideline, like where is the, I lost it. Like 5 elements of a good question. I think that's where we were at. You can specify, for example, a role, a task, a background example, and an output, and this will really give it a lot to work off of. And so in this case, we were trying to get this GPT to have more character. So we specified that we want it to be opinionated and pompous and to act like, I don't know, a world-renowned celebrity chef, apparently. And we tell it specifically that we want step-by-step instructions on preparing steak in a variety of ways, but we want it to be condescending and rude as it does that, which it normally would not be. Background, this is essentially giving it the context of where the request is coming from, why it is what it is, whether or not that has a very strong impact on the AI's response, I don't know. But these are various ways that you could essentially try to get different results from essentially the same prompt. You can be more detailed, less detailed. You have control really over the results that you see, that you get. You just have to know how to ask the right questions. So here we ask it to provide all of that output into a table, and so it does that. And that's essentially it for some very basic prompt writing techniques. We've been talking about like being more detailed. There's also a limit to that, right? There's a point where where there's going to be diminishing returns to the additional instructions that you pass in. There's going to be a point where you run the risk of overfitting. And when you're overfitting, what that is when you're essentially passing in too many data points such that the response you get is very fine-tuned to like a super specific use case. And that might be great in some instances, but in other instances, it's not very useful because it can't apply to a wider range of scenarios or contexts. So based on your end goal, what you need, put in the proper level of control. Find the balance you need between simplicity and complexity. Concept 2, chain of thought prompting. This kind of goes hand in hand with what I was just saying about being very intentional about what you're saying and how you're saying it. In this example, in this first prompt, he's giving a word problem, and because it's given as a normal word problem that maybe a human can interpret, it really doesn't know how to do that. So it does its best to kind of guess for an output. It's essentially working with too limited of a data set. So you can break down and kind of guide the AI to walk through the steps you needed to walk through in order to reach the conclusion. And so here, they're providing an example of why the answer is what it is. Roger started with 5 balls, 2 cans of 3 tennis balls, each is 6 tennis balls. He relates that to a mathematical equation, and that's how the solution is reached. Now the AI can follow this chain of thought prompt pattern and come out with the right answer. Okay, and then there's just some more examples here. Some other things you might want to be conscious of is prompt drift. When you're in a very long thread with ChatGPT, for example, and you've been interacting with it for a long time, there may come a point where it's no longer giving you the results you want because you've been drifting so far away from the original intent, or it's just, again, overloaded with too much junk data. You're confusing it in a sense. And this could be a result of having a history of bad questions in this thread. Whatever the case is, it's all right to just step back and start an entirely new thread with a different prompt, or really just a different variation to the same prompt. And there are other things that you might want to be aware of, like error cascading. I think I wrote this, and I don't remember what I wrote here. So I'm like trying to read through it. A long time ago, it feels. I mean, that sounds a lot like what I was just saying about the prompt drift, but you could read through this to get more detail. these are all really just in the context of interacting with like an existing AI and not so much, training your own AI using machine learning. So I think the reason we included this last cohort is there was a lot of conversation about whether or not we wanted students to use ChatGPT during the program. Now, obviously, we can't stop you from using it, right? And so I guess the thinking behind including this lesson is we want to highlight some key points, some things to be mindful of when utilizing ChatGPT. One, when you're trying to learn something, you learn from the challenge. What stands in the way becomes the way, right? So by going to ChatGPT and asking for a solution that you yourself do not go through, you are robbing yourself of the opportunity in that moment to learn. So it's like a double-edged sword. But there are definitely times where it's beneficial to use ChatGPT. Like, let's say, I don't know, maybe you're not very good at taking notes and you're always losing your notes and you forget a command and you feel like just going to ChatGPT and asking, hey, what's this command? Will it help you memorize that command? Maybe not, but maybe that's not your priority in the moment. Maybe your priority in the moment is just running that command so you can solve whatever you're trying to solve, right? So, I mean, like there's a broad, infinite scope to all the ways you could, should, could not, should not use this. Go into the exercises. There's one on errors, reading errors, and then there's one on writing prompts. And prompt evolution is essentially where you're going to start off with some simple prompts, and then you're going to elaborate on those prompts with the techniques that we've covered to get more, I don't know, interesting results. Any questions? Cool. So I don't know if Omer mentioned this yesterday or if Jordan did. There's this, I guess, how does that rule go? I forget, it was the previous instructor's rule. But when you can utilize the TAs, if they're all being utilized, then reach out to me or the instructor of the day for some assistance. I will stay in the main room. I'll open up breakout rooms. Today, I'm going to open up just a few breakout rooms. I think you all should just try to like make some time to get to know one another. So some rooms that you can all just chat in, get to know each other, talk through the challenges while doing them. And we will reconnect here at 9 o'clock for stand down. And in the meantime, if you need help with anything like GitHub, or if you didn't finish everything that needed to be done for Install Fest yesterday, the TAs and I will be here to help. Sound good?
So we're going to these breakout rooms to work on these prompt challenges, the two at the bottom?
Yeah.
And then if we get through those, then maybe go through some of the GitHub stuff with you guys.
Yeah.
Got it.